Hi and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if it's the first time you visited. My name's Mike. Today I'm going to be walking through how to make composites more believable using Photoshop. How to make your subjects seem like they were shot in the place you're compositing them into. Making them look less like cutouts, essentially. Going to begin with this image here of Ember Wolf, a good friend and a brilliant model, so I'll leave her details in the description below. Coming up to the release of the new Captain America film, and I realised I've never actually edited any of the images from this set, so I thought this would be a great one to visit at this time. So, going to start by duplicating the layer, which is what I always do every time I'm working on anything in Photoshop. Command and J. So you can click, you can drag it down to the new layer button, or you can unlock the layer, hold down Option and press up, down, left or right. I'm going to begin hopping into my channels. So I was taught the very old school way of selecting hair and making difficult selections. This is actually, believe it or not, quite a difficult image to get a decent selection out of because the background's so strong and because the hair's so light. I'm going to choose a channel that gives me the most contrast between hair and background, or selection that I'm trying to make and background. Now this is just for the hair and the head, this selection. I will come back and select the body separately. So don't feel like you always have to make a selection for everything in one go. You can combine your masks and your selections in order to make it easier. So clicking on red, that's a brilliant contrast already. Green, less contrast. Blue does even less. So I'm going to go with red. It gives me a good contrast between the black of the background and the white of the hair. I'm going to duplicate that mask. I'm going to name it head. I could try to make a selection out of this based upon the highlights and the higher contrast, but we want to make it as easy as possible for Photoshop, because you know best. Photoshop does not, although it thinks it does. You want to tell Photoshop the exact area that you want to be selecting. So I'm going to increase the contrast within this channel here, this duplicate channel, to give Photoshop an easier way of actually being able to make the selection. Command and M will bring up my curves. It's just like your histogram. If you haven't used curves before, it increases the contrast, the saturation as well, unless you use luminosity masking. It's a way to do it instead of using levels, which I much prefer curves. Use curves, don't use levels. If I drag this dot in the bottom left here, so in the left is my shadows, just like an ordinary histogram, in the right, highlights. If I drag my shadows in, you see it's making everything darker. I'm going to cancel. I'm just going to zoom in so we can see better what's going on. So Command and M for that. Drag in from the side. Do you see it's making everything dark? See, watch the edges of the hair especially. See how some of the flyaways are disappearing? And it's making it very dark. It's taking away some of this. So I'll start with the top right and do the opposite. Come in like that, and that will make the lights a little bit brighter. Now it's a bit of a juggling act. You want to find a nice point where you've still got some of the hairs. You haven't brightened the darks too much. There aren't too many flyaways that are cut in half. So this would be like too much. Whereas this, that's starting to look around about okay. So I'm going to go with that. Just there, like that. I'm going to go to OK. I'm now going to use the dodge and burn tool to brighten my highlights and darken my shadows. So the shortcut for that is O. And you'll see over here, if I click on it, so we have dodge, which brightens the colours, and burn, which will darken the colours. Just think of it like a match. If you set fire to something, you make it darker. So it burns. So that's for darker, and dodge is to brighten. So I'm going to go into my dodge. I'll use burn tool first, actually. Make sure it's set to shadows, exposure, whatever you feel comfortable using. I'm going to use 20%. I'm going to increase the size, I think, of my brush slightly. So hold down Control and Option, click and drag within your document to make the brush bigger or smaller, up and down to make the brush harder or softer. So a nice soft brush, quite big. And I'm just going to brush onto the shadows, just gently around the edge like that. And then I'm going to swap over to my dodge tool. So just press Shift and the shortcut for the key, Shift and 0 for that. Make sure it's highlights, 20% again. And you'll see as I go over the edge, what it's going to do is going to lighten any lighter pixels that are underneath it. There we go. So I'm happy with that for now. I'll switch into my brush. Make it a bit bigger, just standard brush for this. Soft round, press your size. Make sure you're on white. And I'm just going to, well, I know all of this area here is what I want white. So rather than messing around with doing all that brushing, I'm just going to go round, not to the extremes because you don't want to risk losing any gaps between your hair. Fill it with white. Select. So there we go. I'm going to brush. Awesome. So I think that's going to give us a good start for the masking of the hair. In order to turn this into a selection now, you can just click this button here. But like I said, this is just for the head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, I'm going to draw around the selected area that I want. I'm going to invert the selection and I'm going to fill it with black. There we go. So as masks go, anything that's white is going to be included in the selection. Anything that's black is excluded from it and hidden. So that's just the head selection. Either click that button there or hold down Command and click on the thumbnail. There we go. So that's made that selection. You see the marching ants going around the edge. If I click back onto the RGB channel, you'll see it's just made that as a selection. To my layers, I'm going to apply the mask, the selection, as a mask by just hitting the mask button. There we go. So what you see is black. That's just copied our exact mask over from our channels. I'm going to put a layer in between. Just going to call it BG background. I'm going to fill it with black. There we go. So this, now you can see what our selection is. Now remember me saying over it being difficult for this selection because it's got a lot of blue and very bright hair. So as we zoom in, you'll see there's quite a bit of colour bleed there. So we're going to cope with that next. There are 1,000,001 different ways of doing this. My way is not necessarily the right way to do it. It works, and it's the right way, in my opinion, to do it. So, but you do whatever works for you. So I'm going to actually click on my layer. I'm going to go to Select and Colour Range. And rather than messing around with all of the settings here in the image bits and the fuzziness and range, I'm just going to go to cyans, which is one of the blues, which is right on the edge. So you'll be able to see the selections kind of, it's going to be in here with this. Now this is fine. It says warning, no pixels are more than 50% selected. The selection edges will not be visible. Just means you can't see them. Doesn't mean they're not there. Just means you can't see them because it's a very fine selection. So I'll go to OK. There's no marching ants. Like I said, the selection's too fine for it to show. However, the selection is there. So now if I fill the mask with black, it will hide the cyan. You probably see a little difference there. It just took some of that out. I'll do the same. Select, color range, and I'll go to blues now. Blues. Once again, not select. It's not visible, but that's fine. Okay, click on the mask, fill it with black. There we go. Right, now what we've done here is we've given Photoshop the best chance it can possibly have of making a precise selection given what we've done to the image so far. So if I click Command and click on the mask to make that a selection, you see it's a lot more precise now. You've got a lot more detail in here. And if I go to W, select subject, let's get this out of the way, select a mask. So I'm going to click that. It will take us into our usual selection here. And I'm just going to use decontaminate colors. Before I do that, however, I always just like to put the smart radius on because it likes hair. It's very good for selections, and just give it a radius of 1 pixel just to soften the edges a little bit so it makes the selection a bit easier. Now, if I click decontaminate colors, you'll probably notice a huge change. The blue should all but disappear from around the edge. There we go. Perfectly happy with that selection. We've got a nice believable amount of flyaways and everything. We can always brush some more in to make it a bit more believable if needs be, but that's it was not an easy head to separate from a backdrop. So happy with that. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that output is set to new layer with layer mask. Click. there we go. So here's our new layer. Here's our layer mask on it. And I will now just hide that. We're now going to select the body. So turning this on, I don't need this layer anymore. So I'm going to delete the layer mask, keep the layer. And now we're just going to choose select the body here. I will now go to select subject. There we go. Awesome. With the exception of the bottom of the shield here, with the shield and the gap there, I'd say that's a pretty good selection. So I'm just going to hop back into my selection tools and let's see if we can object select that to add it in. And we want to ideally remove that little area there, which is flicking on and off. No. Okay, I'm going to hold down Option, the minus, and just click within that, just to take that bit out there, and maybe that bit just there is. Oh no, I didn't like that. Okay, we'll just take this out manually, these bits, in a second. Overall, though, selection looks great. We don't need this section up here, so I'm just going to go to my lasso. I'm going to hold down Option, so we get the minus, and I'm just going to draw that out. Here we go. If I add a layer mask to that, I think that's looking pretty good so far. So what we'll do then is we'll zoom in a little bit, move around. So I knew this bit was going to be a bit problematic, and this bit just needs tidying up a little bit. So all I'll do is I'll hop in to my brush, take it down a bit more, zoom in a bit more. So I just want black selected, probably about 10%. And flow. I'm just going to remove that. Just come back up to the fingers. Fill that with black. Fill that with black as well. And we see a little tiny bit bled off there. So I'm not happy with that edge. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in and just tidy that edge up a little bit. Now, when you're working with harder edges like this, don't be afraid to turn your brush hardness up a little bit so you get a closer selection. There we go. Looks absolutely fine like that. So we'll a little bit smaller, just get rid of this bit. I mean, no one's ever going to see in this close on the image. However, it would annoy me if I knew it was there and I hadn't done anything about it. There we go. Right, I'm perfectly happy with that as a selection for the body. We'll add the head back in. And what you can do is control and click onto your mask, and it will make that a selection if it ever catches up. There we go. So what I can then do, take the brush, I'm just going to select black and just going to take that bit out of the selection so it blends in nicely together. There we go. I would say that's a pretty good selection. Now this is just where a bit of creative license comes in here, because I'm not sure about this bit here. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably go down to maybe 1 or 2 pixels and I'll just draw in just some stray hairs. So I'll go to my eyedropper, don't want a point sample, 3x3 average, and I'll just click there. Brush, press Z for pressure, controlled by the tablet, and I'll just draw in just a few hairs to make it more believable. just following the general shape. I'm using the pressure sensitivity of the tablet to get some very fine hairs. There we go. Awesome. Group all three of these together. Name it Ember. There we go. And I'm perfectly happy with that selection. So we're going to go with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a background into this so we can start using some more advanced techniques. Not that wasn't more advanced, but before I do, I like to work in an 8x10 size or a 4x5 crop. So I'm just going to make this document that kind of a crop. I'm happy with it being a transparent one, so just going to click on the tick. There we go. Let's fill that with black. Oh. Awesome. I'm going to bring in a backdrop now, which I'm going to place in between Ember, so we can see how the cutout works and everything. I'm going to use this image I've got here from Andre Benz from Unsplash, and all I've done is I've literally just added a depth blur, like a depth map to it, and then obviously because I didn't want all of the big Star Wars poster and everything in the background, so I've edited that out and just made it a slightly different dimension. So I'm going to click and drag that in to my image. Right, so we've got our backdrop in here, and you can see how good the masking has been already with that. She fits right into the scene perfectly. So it's literally just tweaks now to make it more believable. I'm going to make a marquee selection. Just bring that out to there, down shift. Do that because I quite like the composition. I like where Ember's sat in that. So I'm just going to fill in this area. Content aware fill. Let's go with content aware, shall we? Yeah, I think that'll do for now. Okay, moving on. What I'm going to do now is I think I'm going to add some flares and stuff in to the back and also give it an overall blend. So it all looks like it ties in together nicely. Ties in better. So it looks more sat in the scene. So in order to begin that, what I'll do is I'm going to create a gradient map over the top. And I'm going to use this one. So it's like a purple and a green. And I'm going to set the mode to color. And then I'm going to turn the opacity way down on it to just give it a little bit of a blend. I'm then going to selective color. Here we go. So selective colors. So this will affect the overall image. These are very bright, whereas Ember's a bit darker at the moment. So I want to bring these a bit more together. So what I'll do is I'll just turn these down a little bit, these sliders. So it's all just very gentle tweaking the images just until it starts to come together and starts to feel right. So I think there we go. Let's move into the greens. I'm just working my way through each of the different colours. This comes down a lot to just personal preference and just experience with, well, basically messing around with the settings. It looks probably like you're not doing a great deal to the image. But when you look at it afterwards, you can see a real difference. I won't speed this bit up, even though it's boring as hell. It's watching me play with sliders. Blues. Call me blues as they are, because I don't want to mess around with the blues too much. There's not too much going on with that. So magentas. Well done. There we go. Now, the whites, neutrals, and blacks, they usually have much more of an impact on the image as you're doing it. So you'll notice a huge amount more difference here, like with, you should be able to see the much lighter colours changing. Let me down to -A. A bit more yellow, make it a bit warmer. Neutrals. I always like to add a little bit more warmth into the images usually, so. Here we go. Now I'm going to do colour balance. And I think I'm only going to mess around with the midtones in this one. So we're taking these a bit more this way. And a bit more towards the green. There we go. I think I'll leave the shadows and the highlights, won't make any changes to them. And then I think finally what I will do is just hop in and make a curves adjustment layer. And rather than doing an overall curves adjustments layer, I'm just going to jump in to each individual channel. I'm going to hit the shadows and the highlights. I'm not going to leave a midtone one because I want them to blend in as much as possible. I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. A bit of a gentle curve upwards. I'll do the same with the greens. Just wanted to give it kind of almost the old Marvel posters. Just make it a bit more vintage looking. So it's only really now that you can see it coming together, starting to be a little bit more. So I put all of these adjustments into a folder and turn it off. You see a huge difference how it blends together. So all I'm going to do now is to add some final touches to this, some sharpening and everything as well. I'm going to bring in some flares and we're going to sort this section out here because I really don't like that. We'll add some vignetting around it, I think, to cope with that. But also, once I've added the flares, I'm going to just do a little bit of a background light maybe. So let's start. Let's start with this one. Get on over here. Increase the size. I'm going to actually change the colour of that as well once I've moved that under. So because I've put it under my adjustments, so we'll name adjustments, it affects everything underneath. So it will also affect this as well. To begin with, you can see this horrible white mark going across the top, and because it's set to screen mode, rather than mess around with all the masking, I'm just going to blend. If it's very bright, I want it to be kept. If it's darker, I want it to go. So I'm just going to hold down Command and split that part. So you see the lines almost disappeared and we still got this. So I'll just add a quick mask in to my gradient, radial gradient, just to take any hint of the edge of it being there. This one's a bit too bright, I think, so I'm just going to take that out a little bit. There we go. And then I'm going to adjust the colour of this so that one side is red and one side is a little bit more blue. So if I create a hue and saturation layer, I'm going to clip it to the layer underneath by pressing Option, Command and G, or clicking in between the layer like that. I'm going to go to colorize and turn the saturation all the way up, and that looks fine for the red one for me, so that's okay. So that's red. Turn that one off, create another one, hue and saturation, clip it to that again, colorize, saturation to 100%, and we want the bluish color now. So let's go with that. So we'll call that one blue. I'm going to invert both of the masks, so whatever's on there is hidden. And I'm going to bring it back in on this side for this one. So we have the red. And I'm going to bring in the blue on this side. There we go. I'm going to go back to my flares. I'm going to bring in, so we use that one, a bit bright, that one. Actually quite like this one up at the top, so I'm going to take that one, bring it over into our image. I think that flare will look great on the shield. So let's bring that one above Ember, but underneath the adjustments. I'll put that just there. There. And the next flare, I think if I can get to that one. That one. Let's bring that one in. That one up at the top there as well on the star. That looks quite nice. Could maybe do one up here to just hide the fact that it's not actually metal and it's a cosplay outfit. So we could put that there. I actually quite like that as well. So yeah, we'll go with that and we'll leave that there. Some flares for the background then. There's that one. Let's take that one. That one. Let's drag these two in. Starting with the first one. Now I want those underneath Ember. So there we go. First one. Let's put that there. Try and hide some of that dreadful cloning work. Ordinarily, I wouldn't leave that. I would go over it entirely. But like I said, with the sake of this video not being ridiculously long, because I've realised from all of my videos so far, I tend to waffle on and on and on. So I'm trying to keep them a bit shorter. Failing miserably, but I'm trying. So what I think we'll do is I'll just do one more flare over here, just to balance it out a little bit. So let's bring on this, so maybe it looks like some street lights in the back. And I'm going to put a hue and saturation clipped layer above that, colorize it. There we go, saturation to 100. Let's dial that back down a little bit. So we've got a nice red light there. There we go. Awesome. And I think I'll just remove that behind a tiny bit so it doesn't overwhelm anything. This is still a little bit bold here, this bit, so I might just nip into this original one and just tone it down a little tiny bit. There we go. Kind of halfway between, so I'm just going to fade that out. So let's just... There we go. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an extra little pro tip here with some highlighting around the edges. I'm going to group all of this together. No, not all of that. All of this together. We call it background, or BG. Background. Textures. Right. I'm going to duplicate Ember's layer and I'm going to merge it, Command and E. So we have this as a full combined layer. I'm going to create a hue and saturation layer over the top and do exactly what I did just then. So I'm going to clip it to Ember's layer. So Option, Command and G. And I'm going to duplicate that one as well. So duplicate that one. There we go, clip it to it as well. This first one, I'm going to colorize, saturation all the way up, and I'm going to leave it as that red, because it's very vivid. Love it. Going to use that one as the red, edge highlight, and this one above it, we're going to go opposite, saturation all the way up. We're going to go with a blue, like that blue. So this is, it's very much affecting everything. So we don't want it affecting the shadows quite as much. So if we double click on it, go into our blend if, and the underlying layer, we need to just hold down Option, split this in half, and just take it away from some of the shadows. So I'm just dragging it upwards. So you see it's come away from the red a lot more there. So I'm happy with that. And I'll now invert that mask. It's gone. I will go on to the red one, do the same, double click, underlying layer with the darker, bring that back a little bit to maybe there. Awesome. Invert it to hide it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to get my brush, soft, round, pressure sized. I'm going to turn off that, so Z, turn it off, and I'm going to set my flow to around about 2%. So very low, very low. Brush goes bigger. Click up to make it softer, or drag upwards to make it softer rather. Make sure you're on white. And then I'm just going to go just around the edges. I'm going to give it a little bit more opacity with this. So let's go with 10% flow. Not opacity, flow rather. So I'm going to stop there. I'll come up to the hair in a moment. So all I'm doing is just going around all the harder edges here. Now, as the edges start to get more difficult, and as they come closer in, I'll just turn my flow down. So that's when I go back to the 4% or the 2%. I'll make my brush a bit smaller, in fact, a bit bigger for this bit, and just blend it in. So we want a little bit of a, just follow the highlights. You'll know as a photographer how the highlights work and how they should look. So just follow your natural instinct. Don't go too much into the shadows with it. That'll be fine. So this area where it's gone darker there, I don't like. So I'm going to go to the black, turn my opacity up to 10%. I'm just going to gently remove that. Don't want to remove it entirely. Just going to use the edge just to give it a hint of colour on that side. Well, way too much. Normally use the shortcuts, but I've got my laptop in front of my tablet this time because I'm working downstairs. So making the brush smaller, lowering the opacity if it gets to a more of a difficult edge or selection. Because so I'm going to leave it at that for the reds for now, and I'm going to move over onto the blues. Starting off with a big brush, just give it a little bit of a hint moving through. That was a bit too much of a hint, so let's take some of that back. A bit smaller. And obviously, because the outfit's blue, it's probably not going to show up quite as much. Just on the lighter area. So I'm going to increase my flow a little bit just to give it the best chance. That's better. There we go. Now what I'm going to do, just to kind of blend it in a little bit more as well, is I'm going to duplicate both of these. So just Command and J, so that's the blue. Command and J, that's the red. Now as I've done that, it's unclipped that, so make sure that doesn't happen and make sure they are clipped properly. Now if I delete the layer mask on that one, delete the layer mask on the blue as well. Now I'm going to do 2 hide all masks. There we go. Now these are going to be just to blend in gently from the edges. So I'm going to just very low opacity, just click and drag in on either side. And I would probably say after some sharpening that this is going to be blended in enough. I would mess around with the opacities a little bit. So that's very bright around the edges. The red's very vivid, so I might just turn that down just a little tiny bit, so it matches more of the red in the back. The blue's fine because it's not very saturated. I'm going to do create a new layer, make a blend of all of the layers, filter high pass, zoom into 50% first because about 2, it's fine. Let's go for hard light. And there we go. I would say that's pretty much done for now. I usually tend to go back over my images and tweak them before I publish them and everything like that. But just as an idea of what goes into some of my composites, how to do the masking, how to do the highlighting, how to build up some edges from the lighting. And if you look at the beginning for what we started with, I mean, it's definitely, it doesn't look like she's being shot in an entirely different place. It looks like a superhero composite. So I will leave it at that. Any questions, please do feel free to leave them in the comments below. And thank you so much for any likes and any subscriptions as well. And just anybody that you direct to my channel, anyone that wants to learn a bit more about Photoshop. This obviously wasn't a complete beginner's guide, as I've been doing a lot more of recently, but hopefully it was easy enough to follow. Anything I missed? In the comments below. Thanks very much again, guys. Have a great day. Bye.